And there's a massive problem in this sector, and the problem is the amortization cycle is high. You change your iPhone maybe every 2 to 5 years, but once you have a building there, you might not change it for 20, for 40 years. So a pretty big issue, and since 20 years, more than 20 years, right? I'm looking at this, the theoretical optimum, so the triple bottom line. And of course, we know to change something in our sector, we somehow would need to be in this Shangri-La. This is Shangri-La. This is where everything comes together. And I'll tell you why this is so difficult in the real estate sector these days to get there, and why so far we don't see, let's say, really sustainable business coming at scale. Well, first of all, if you go to any kind of conference about real estate in a moment, you'll have this flurry of prop techs. And they have a specific promise. The promise is here, from green to ESG, how data-driven transparency changed real estate for good. That's past tense, changed real estate for good. And that's very interesting, yeah, because we are quite far away from these. That's not to say that some of these players you see here, whether they're called deep key, measurable, building minds, or stuff like that, that they're not very, very interesting companies that offer great help for our industry. But it's not only about data. And data itself is a big issue for us. So if we talk about data, for example, if you look at your smartphones, or if you drive a car, you get more data from a 400 euro iPhone or from a 40K car than you get from a 40 million real estate, from a house, right? This thing produces less data than your smartphone. And that's a reality. And that's why, and that's got, let's say, that's part because it's a very complex value chain that we have. And it's partly because the guys that built this building will say, hey, why should I put in so much sensors? I rather put in a new carpet or whatever. That's the way they think. So where's this sweet spot, and why don't we get there? The real issue in real estate is we have an overpriced market. We had an overpriced market because we had a very zero interest rate environment, so everything could be bought and leveraged. So you would have very little of your own capital, and you would take a lot of credit from the bank to finance your houses. And how did you do that? You did do that because you were putting a lot of value on the house. Now, with the interest rates going down, the price of the house goes down. And that makes it very difficult to get a premium, because if you already have an overpriced asset, you won't get even more on top of it. In practice, what does it mean? If you look at this building, if let's say your pension fund would own this building, it probably has this building, let's say, in its books for 550 million euro, right? And if I go there and say, hey, let's put a lot of fancy stuff here, like PV on the roof, optimization of the whole operations of this building, then they would say, hey, cool, but then I can mark it up, right? Then this building will be valued at 55 million. I invest 2.5 and it's 5 more. No, what basically comes out is it's still valued at 50. You don't get the markdown. So we are not talking, in the real estate industry, at least until recently, we were not talking about investing and having a higher value. We were talking about investing and maintaining the value. And that is a completely different story. It's a much more difficult to sell, right? So the brown discount is a big problem. But, and that's something for the whatever aficionados, the guys that really look into real estate or might even like to invest or like to move there, we now are in the process of repricing. So at least in Germany, it goes down up to 30%. And I think, you know, that gives room to do manage the green. So that would give dedicated players the room to say, hey, I buy this for 45, I invest 2.5 million, and I sell it for 50. And then it makes sense, right? Then we have the incentives all right, and then we are getting closer to the Shangri-La. How does that look in practice if you look at any kind of real estate? at least in Germany. This is a CO2 transitory risk analysis of an actually real estate. It's an office building. It was built 2014. It is already stranded. It's already stranded in two categories, which is decarbonization and its energy efficiency. How do we know it's stranded? The European Union has given us a beautiful tool. It's called CREM, Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor. And with some data, we actually get these curves, right? And then we analyze and we say, what you see here is basically if we put PV on top, how does it affect? Yeah, that's M1. So you see here my emissions go down. And then we do something about the heating pumps, and then we get here. So that's what we need to do with all buildings. So 90% of the problems already built in Europe. We need to push all buildings through this analysis, find out what we can do, and invest. And that's a massive task. So and we probably need more than just the Avengers to make that happen. Because I mean, even if you just imagine the street where you're living and you look down the street and you see the time frame that we have, yeah, the next goals are 2035, 2050, and you think that maybe in 8 from 10 houses we really need to go in there. So there needs construction needs to arrive. They need to do something. So that's really a massive, massive challenge. Now, getting a bit higher from this building that you've just seen. What are the challenges that now I'm speaking like an asset manager, right? So I'm responsible for a portfolio of 24 billion in real estate. That's 400 big assets. That's 6 million square meters. That's quite some concrete out there. So there are structural challenges. There are sectoral challenges and regulatory challenges. I think, let's say, it's really about data. As I said, we are flying this big Boeing without any data, and I'll show you why it's so difficult. There's a large quantity of legislation I'll also show you, at least in the EU, but I think UK is not so different, or the US. In the end, while we choose different pathways, the pressure is on. And I wouldn't say we lack a common ESG definition, because the EU Commission has given us first ideas about, in the taxonomy, about what they think is sustainable. But that's super, super complex. And I've seen complex stuff before, but what's coming from Brussels, the taxonomy, SFDR, CSRD, I'll show you, that really blows your mind, right? I mean, GRI reporting is like a piece of cake. In comparison, it's nothing. So the sectoral challenges I already said. The silo is really one of the biggest challenges. So if just talking about you, maybe you have a kind of defined contribution plan, whatever, a pension plan, your pension provider invests with us in real estate. So then we do the fund management and the asset management. But we are there, maybe once or twice a year seeing these assets. So we are delegating that to the property manager and the facility manager. So there's a lot of people involved, and that makes it very difficult with the data. And last but not least, and that's really funny, let's say the data gets less and less the more often you sell a building, right? Because the guys that were here 20 years ago when this was built, or 40 years ago, they're not there anymore. And their little folders that were full of paper, they were lost somewhere. Maybe they're here, maybe they're not here. So we lose knowledge about the buildings. It's not that we gain. And I think all of that is it's self-explanatory. So when we talk about ESG data and real estate, what does it really mean? Right? You have seen these prop techs and what they can do for us. Now, the very, very basic data is knowing how much water is used here, potable water, wastewater. How much waste is produced here? Electricity, right? And then maybe it's gas for the heating or whatever. So that's a very basic data set, and you would think that's super easy. And below I've said, so you want this CREM analysis, which you've just seen. That may be like 20 to 30 different data points I need to enter. If you want to do a score assessment, so a real score, the GRESS score, for example, which is used worldwide by pension funds to assess the ESG quality of a building, you already need like 80 data. If you do a massive, big ESG analysis, let's say now you won't do that for your private home, but let's say if you do a transaction and you have a 100, 200 million asset that you move around in the market, then it may be 300 data points. And now we talk about one single data point. And this is a utility from the city of Gelsenkirchen, and it's the billing for the potable water. And now my property, my PropTech system with automated machine reading readout tells me that we used in last year, we used 199 cubic meters. Then I ask the property manager and say, that seems a bit weird. And he reads out 135 cubic meters. Now the correct value is 310 cubic meters. It's one data point, right? And if we look at that, you can say, oh, they're all, it's not evident, this. Now the funny thing is, this is one utility in Germany. We have 800, and they all have their way of producing these billings. So now, if you think there, let's say we have 4 or 5 different partners for just these very basic things, gas, electricity, water, waste. And we have this, so easily we have 2,400 to 3,000 different data formats that we receive, yeah? Or that we could receive just in Germany, and we are a pan-European player. So that shows you how big the data issue is really for us. It's massive, and without knowing what happens in the building, how can we take the right decision? Yeah, how can we benchmark the building? And the next thing is, when do we get this information? We get it mostly late. So you get your yearly consumption data in Germany. You might get it in April. So that's even late for a kind of yearly reporting. So there's all kinds of challenges, and this is just to let's say, sensibilize people how difficult it is, even if you have a good machine learning program in place and the great Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley stumbles if the city of Gelsenkirchen sends over this beautiful recycled paper potable water billing. So, talking about regulation, we just said that's one of the major challenges in our industry, and this is just 4 high-level things that are happening these days in Europe. It's the EU taxonomy, which is a definition of what kind of activities are sustainable, where in the moment, I think we have 2 of 6 categories in environment. And then we should also talk about governance and social. We have the SFDR, it's Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is a regulation which is very much about if we asset managers want to sell you people here our products, what kind of data we need to provide, how we need what do we need to do in the prospectus, etc. Yeah. So if we say, for example, something you might find today is if you buy a real estate investment fund investing in Europe, in continental Europe, you might find something like, we promise that no building in this fund will be above the decarbonization path of the CRREM tool for more than 5 years, or stuff like that, right? That's what you put in, and then you're allowed to sell this product according to Article 8. Article 9 is deep sustainability, and there are very few people that really manage that. So that would be the Shangri-La thing that we saw, right? And it's difficult to achieve. MiFID, it's also a regulation how to sell financial products. And it's super complex, and CSRD is the corporate sustainability reporting directive. That's what all the companies have to do, yeah? And all this works together because, of course, or let's say, what is the cumulative effect of that? Now it means for the real estate industry, if we want to refinance a building, we will not be able to do that anymore without the data that I just showed you. because the bank will not be allowed to finance that. And that will have a massive impact on the market, right? Not because the building itself has more value or not, but because it gets so much more difficult for me to refinance a credit of a building that has no ESG data. So, and that is happening, and that's also part of what the banks are doing, what the financial supervisor is doing. And that's the basic idea of the EU Commission, how to direct the financial flows and to the right allocation, right? So, okay, last but not least, and then we come from, so to say, from the compliance side, hopefully a bit more to the opportunity side. This is a massive exercise. Yeah, I've put up data from another regulatory exercise called MiFID. I think this has the same impact. So it really, let's say, as an asset manager, you really have to say part of my IT budget now goes towards ESG data, right? You need to train people. All of that needs to be in an auditing quality, right? It's not enough that you just do it. You need to document it. You need to have these processes ready when one of the big four comes and does the auditing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a major exercise. And it's easy that it has an effect of 10 to 15% on your cost base, right? On your general cost. So all pain, no gain. Difficult to say, right? On an asset level, I just told you the repricing in the market will offer opportunity. But then we also have, of course, the players in the market, and you need to see who is really going for what. So the big US hedge funds like Cerberus, Oaktree, they'll come to the German market or European market, and they just look for distressed assets. So they look for companies that are under pressure and then sell cheaply. But they won't do manage to green. They'll just get this, wait 2 years, and then resell it when the market is going up. So that's one thing. But I think that the bigger asset managers, hopefully I don't know where your pensions are parked, or whatever, the Aberdeens of the world, the Fidelities of the world, that they go for a bit more proactive approach, and they go for manage to green. They buy underpriced or they buy repriced property. They do manage to green. They put PV up there. They do a lot of things that can be done. And then these are more valuable, right? Because they're in the decarbonization path. They can be easily refinanced, and that's a hope. But what I really think is, and I think that's I'm coming back to a point that I made before. And I think we heard it from a lot of speakers here, like the speaker before. In the end, the system absorbs an extra cost, and somebody has to pay for it. So in the end, it will be less profitable to invest in real estate for a time, because we need to do all of that. Yeah, and my company will be less profitable in general, because somebody needs to absorb the cost of having these compliance things in place. And most people, I think most players will be in an unchanged business model. They just try to hand down the cost or be a bit more efficient. Others, and there's a lot of discussion that I think everybody is also having a look, could we offer additional services? Yes, there's still the question who pays for it, but could we ask Fidelity more, let's say a little ESG on top fee, yeah, because we incur more costs. It's very difficult, I can tell you. Even if you work with the players that have the nicest ESG side, if you tell them, look, now we have a big team here and we're paying all these prop tax, could we get a bit more money for managing these funds? They say, no, that's all part of your fiduciary duty. And these are mostly the same people that told you 2 years ago, what? Pay for this? No. And then, of course, we could have a revolution. You could have, let's say, you could really use this impact that you have, instead of playing a defensive game of margins, of course, to really have new products or have a new business model. And I would like to, let's say, open it up a bit more and say, look, guys, normally, if you talk about sustainability, also in my company, we talk about product. So they go like, oh, yes, I heard now we have to do ESG. How bad, yeah? But what can we do? So what we do is we now have an ESG product. In our case, let's say it's Article 8, Article 9, right? But of course, you can think in a much more holistic way about how this is going to affect you and whether you can also, for example, I mean, if you do real estate, right, could you do hydrogen? Could you do infrastructure investments? Would that be interesting? There's a lot you can do. You can venture beyond also, I think, the product. And that's always, let's say, or my big point would be that you really use this pressure that's now in the market to rethink all parts of your business model. It might be that you still end in an unchanged model. It might be that you really find new interesting parts. Now I would like to end not with the Avengers, but and that's just for my industry, right? Because this is the pavilion of Mies van der Rohe, who was born in my home city, Aachen. And it was built 100 years ago. Yeah? And I think here we see, 100 years ago, we see people saying, hey, that was the time when they still were building Gaudi in Barcelona, right? And Art Deco and everything with flowers. So, and that's what I want to say. I think we have to really rethink how we do things, how we construct buildings. Yeah, because in the end, you heard that, the cement, all of that. That's a real issue. The construction material is an issue. Yeah, and if we really radically rethink what we do, yeah, I think we can lower this impact. If we just incrementally do a little bit, and that's unfortunately what we're doing at the moment, we'll still be out of our sector goals. Yeah, but everybody is invited to rethink business and to fail. I learned it's German companies don't like to fail, but UK companies are a bit more open to it. Anyhow, so let's rethink a bit more radically. I want to thank you for your attention, and I think that I was actually able to compensate for 5 minutes that we lost before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georg.